Hi, my name is Kelsey Samuels, and I did my paper and presentation on ethics in the Me Too movement. I'm the executive director of a nonprofit that serves victims of domestic violence and sexual assault, so this topic was really personal to me. In October of 2017, Ashley Judd accused Harvey Weinstein of sexual abuse in an article published by the New York Times. Other victims began stepping forward with accusations against Weinstein. This created momentum, which was fueled by a tweet by actress Alyssa Milano that asked other survivors to tell their stories with the hashtag #MeToo. This request turned the Me Too organization, which was founded by Tarana Burke in 2006, into the Me Too movement. There were many accusers that came forward about the abuse at the hands of Harvey Weinstein, but many other prominent businessmen and men in the media quickly came under fire for former abuse as well. For the first time, people began talking about abuse and no longer pretending it was something that only happened to a small percentage of the population. It became clear that many men had used power, authority, and intimidation to commit acts of harassment and abuse against women. What also became clear is that many others knew about the abuse and chose to do nothing at the time. Social media was a catalyst for victims to begin speaking out. Once Alyssa Milano asked others to share their stories, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram began filling with stories of survivors of those in power who had abused others. For the first time, there was a mural of voices instead of a singular accuser. Society could argue with one person's claims, but they could not argue with 50 that had claims against the same abuser. Merit was given to prominent women in power who spoke out, and this empowered others to begin sharing their stories. Talking about the abuse became normalized, and this created a willingness for others to listen. For the basis of this presentation, I'll be focusing on sexual violence against women at the hands of powerful men. However, I fully acknowledge unhealthy sexual power dynamics are not limited to only men preying on women. This presentation will talk about the ethical dilemmas within the Me Too movement, and specifically the Bill Cosby case and the cultural implications that have shaped how society views cases of sexual violence against women. One ethical issue that arose within the movement were the restraints placed by the legal system. Using a legal yardstick to measure harassment leaves room for misconduct. The legal system sets guidelines on what is prosecutable rape. Many times, a victim can do everything right. They can report, go to the hospital, get a rape kit, and agree to go forward with a case. This sometimes will still not result in a trial or conviction. Rape injuries can be argued as rough sex. Assault can be called consensual sex. Many women are afraid to come forward because both the legal system and society have set such limited measurements on what can be justified as rape that it often leaves the victim humiliated and defeated, facing a painful trial with no sense of justice. This paints a picture of the victim being dishonest and discourages others from coming forward. Many times in major assault cases, there were people who knew about the abuse and chose not to do anything about it. Within many of the Me Too cases, there were often other powerful individuals who ran in the same circle or were even family members of the perpetrators that knew about the crimes they had been committing. Those in power have an ethical obligation to understand its implication on others, and in many cases, neglect of power can be just as bad as abuse of power. When Harvey Weinstein's abuse came to light, it was described as one of Hollywood's open secrets. Quentin Tarantino even came out and said he, as well as many others, knew about the crimes and should have done something to stop it. The University of Texas defines this as moral muteness, which occurs when people witness unethical behavior and choose not to say anything. This could also be considered part of the bystander effect. Those who had the ability to come forward and chose not to had just as much of a role in the continuation of the abuse as the perpetrators themselves. Their action, and consequently lack of, could have made an impact on the future abuse of other women. This showcases a culture of compliance where many witnesses to abuse chose not to acknowledge the administrative evil that was ahead of them. Reports of abuse are often hidden for fear of retaliation against the victim. Both the media and legal system often persecute women who come forward about the abuse at the hands of powerful men. Ethics in reporting can be extremely controversial. When a victim chooses to come forward, their name and story makes it on the front page for the world to read and draw their own conclusions. The reporting itself can be a dilemma. On one hand, the reporter has a duty to report the whole story. On the other hand, many survivors of sexual assault do not wish to be identified or associated with the issue. A survivor's decision to seek justice or testify in a case opens their life up for the media to scrutinize. When Christine Ford chose to speak out against Brett Kavanaugh, it brought intense media scrutiny to herself and her family, which led to the hashtag #LockHerUp. When Andrea Constand chose to speak up against Bill Cosby, culture's response was that she was too unattractive for Bill Cosby to assault, putting stipulations on how a woman should look in order to be assaulted. Comments were also made about Constand's race with the implication that she could not have been assaulted or pursued by Cosby because she was not African American. When women do come forward with accusations, they are often They often have their past dug up by supporters of the perpetrator, frequently referencing past relationships, substance abuse, or political and monetary interests as the reason the victim's claims cannot be substantiated. A major case that I looked into for this project specifically was the Bill Cosby trial. Andrea Constand was a basketball coach at Temple University, a 4-year collegiate college where Bill Cosby was on the board of trustees. She claimed that Bill Cosby drugged and raped her in his home in 2004 when he went over to discuss her career and future opportunities. They had a mentor-mentee relationship. After the assault, Andrea moved to Toronto, where she told her mother of the abuse in 2005. They called Bill Cosby to confront him and contacted the Canadian police. Bill Cosby returned their call, apologized, and said that the sex was consensual. The Montgomery County District Attorney, which is where the abuse took place, declined pressing charges and cited that there was insufficient credible evidence. Andrea Constead then decided to file a civil lawsuit against Cosby, where 12 other women agreed to testify, citing similar interactions with Cosby. In a deposition testimony, Cosby admits to giving quaaludes to women for sex, and both parties signed a non-disclosure agreement. In 2014, existing accusations against Bill Cosby were brought to light by a joke in a comedy sketch. The video of the sketch went viral, instantly grabbing the attention of the media. This in itself shows the level of seriousness taken by the community about abuse and why it took a man's voice to bring accusations to the forefront when multiple women had been speaking out against Cosby for decades. In total, there were more than 60 accusers that came forward with abuse spanning more than 4 decades. A judge decided to release parts of Mr. Cosby's deposition, which led to the reopening of the criminal investigation. Later in 2015, Kevin Steele was elected as the new Montgomery County District Attorney. He previously criticized the 2005 decision not to prosecute Cosby. He made this case a priority for his department. He decided to move forward with the arrest of Cosby at the end of 2015, shortly before the 12-year statute of limitation expiration. Andrea Constead was the first and only case to go to trial regarding Bill Cosby. Some women simply didn't want to press charges, others wanted to but couldn't because of the statute of limitation. There was a hung jury that resulted in a retrial. During the retrial, the judge allowed for 5 women to testify about their abuse and similarities between the Constand case. The final case led to a guilty verdict, with Bill Cosby being sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison. Bill Cosby hid behind his America's Dad persona, a front that many people used as his defense when accusations began to pick up momentum. Cosby had spent decades leaning into his popular image as a paternal figure to bolster his influence as a paternalistic one. There were many cultural undertones that created a conflict of interest for much of America in believing the accusations against Cosby. The Bill Cosby Show was one of the most popular television series for the better part of a decade. The Bill Cosby Show created a media presence for the African American community, highlighting race, representation, and respectability. Many Americans grew up with a sense of identity instilled by the Cosby Show and a sense of cultural pride that it created. This past year, I had the opportunity to sit through a presentation made by Kristen Gibbons Fedden, who was the prosecutor who tried the Bill Cosby case. She shared about how, as an employee of the district attorney's office, she herself had to really reflect and set aside some of her own personal biases in order to effectively and ethically try the case. As someone who grew up in the Black community, she shared about how Bill Cosby was a major influence to her family and in her life, and how growing up watching the show as a little girl instilled in her that she had the ability to pursue whatever career she wanted to. This ended up leading her to become an attorney. The case had a profound impact on many Americans, Fedden included. Many people chose to compartmentalize the abuse perpetrated at the hands of Cosby and instead chose to focus on his accomplishments and accolades. Bill Cosby is a perfect example of how people with power, money, and popularity are often not held to the same standard as others. Bill Cosby used bribery as a form of financial power to silence victims and keep them from coming forward with accusations against him. He often paid off women he assaulted in order to keep them quiet. The amount of his non-disclosure with Andrea Constead came to light when the case reopened, which revealed that he paid her more than $3 million. This very transaction was used against her by the defense to paint a picture of her being a gold digger, only after Cosby for his money. The implications of both the final trial of Bill Cosby case and a majority of trials within the Me Too movement were that the awareness that the silenced voice of abused and oppressed women matter. It created a culture change that for once said that men in power would be held accountable for abuse and assault. As a result of all of the accusations, charges, and verdict, Cosby's work has been pulled from a majority of U.S. networks. He had many of his projects ended. He lost several honorary titles and degrees, and a majority of his supporters distanced themselves, not to mention his time in prison. This sent a message to perpetrators everywhere that the abuse of women would no longer be tolerated by society. The case also highlighted the barriers created by the statute of limitations and the believability of victims. Although many cases can't go to trial due to the statute of limitations, the Cosby case did show the importance of believing victims when they choose to come forward. Some Cosby accusers stepped forward more than 40 years after their assault, but this didn't take away from their experience or their voice. The major implication of the Me Too movement is that prominent men in politics, business, and media are being held accountable for past incidents of sexual misconduct. These are all significant repercussions that challenge systemic gender inequality and display a shift in our country's decision to believe the stories of oppressed women and seek consequences for men in power who perpetrate acts of sexual violence.